Welcome, everyone, to this fifth topical session in the U.S.-Japan Council's virtual 2020 public symposium titled Cultural and Educational Exchange, a Winning Investment. I'm Bill Tsutsui. I teach Japanese history at Harvard University, and I'm very proud to serve on the board of the USJC and to chair the Council's Program Development Committee. I first want to take this opportunity to thank our many sponsors and promotional partners for your support of the U.S.-Japan Council and this symposium. I'd like to offer our sincere appreciation to our platinum sponsor, Fabit, and to our other platinum sponsor, the Ford Foundation. I'd also like to thank our title sponsors, Central Pacific Bank Foundation, Hitachi, Itoen, Mitsui, MUFG Union Bank, the Terasaki Nibei Foundation, and Toyota Research Institute. I would also like to thank our signature sponsors, who you can see displayed on this slide. We are so grateful for your support in helping make programming like this possible. And to the many companies and individuals who make up our premier sponsors, we truly appreciate your generosity. We're proud of this fantastic group of supporters, and we couldn't be here without you. Finally, our gold sponsors can be seen on this slide, and we would like to once again thank each and every one of you for your continued support, especially through this most challenging of years. I'd also like to thank our promotional partners for this session, whose logos can be seen on this screen. Now, I'm really thrilled today that we'll have the opportunity to hear from some wonderful panelists and to think together about the future of cultural and educational exchanges between the United States and Japan. The USJC, of course, is all about cultivating meaningful people-to-people relationships and building durable partnerships across the Pacific. And happily for us all, there are a wide variety of other vibrant local, national, regional organizations, programs, and initiatives out there that are also dedicated to promoting international engagement and cross-cultural understanding. I suspect that everyone in this session is already a true believer in such work, and I'm guessing a lot of you have had your lives enriched and your perspectives broadened by studying abroad, by being part of Japan-America societies and sister city relationships, benefiting from virtual and performing arts exchanges, and participating in programs like Tomodachi. We're going to hear about some real success stories today, hopefully learn some best practices, and look together to a time when, once again, we can all get on airplanes, welcome homestays to our communities, gather in museums and performance halls, and not worry so much about unmuting ourselves every time we want to say something or make a new friend. And now I'd like to turn it over to our moderator, Paige Cottingham Streeter. Paige is the Secretary General of the U.S. Kulcon Panel and Executive Director of the Japan-U.S. Friendship Commission. She has many years of experience directing and overseeing exchanges involving legislators and government officials, business and nonprofit leaders, students and scholars, and many others. Please join me in welcoming her and our great lineup of guest speakers today.
Bill, thank you so much for that warm introduction. And may I also add my thanks to all of the sponsors who are making this symposium and particularly this panel discussion possible. Without the financial investment and the sweat equity of all of you, programs like this wouldn't be happening, and we certainly know how valuable they are to not only the US-Japan relationship, but our communities where we are serving. Now, it's my pleasure this afternoon to serve as the moderator for a fantastic panel. We've got leaders in various industries and fields that are supporting the people-to-people ties between Japan and the United States. And it's my pleasure to welcome our panel of four, who I'll briefly introduce and then give them an opportunity to share their experience both with Japan, with the United States, and their different organizations. Welcome. So first, may I introduce of the four, Ms. Patsy Yoon Brown, and Patsy is the Executive Director of the Japan-America Society of Houston, Texas. She's also a fellow JET, and I'm delighted to have had the opportunity to work with Patsy when we've been trying to promote people-to-people ties involving not only the United States and Japan, but between Texas and the US as well. Patsy, welcome. And it's next my pleasure to introduce you to Mr. Cameron McKinney. And Cameron is based in New York City. He's the artistic director and founder of Kizuna Dance. We'll hear a bit more about that. I'm also proud to say that Cameron is one of this year's, well, the 2020 Japan-US Friendship Commission's creative artists. But for the disruption we're all experiencing because of COVID, Cameron would actually be joining us from Japan. but we're confident that he'll be able to get on an airplane not too far off in the future and work with his collaborative partner, producing a wonderful work of creative art. And we'll hear more about Cameron's work in the realm of dance. And also in the space of performing arts, we have Ms. Kyoko Yoshida. And Kyoko is joining us from the Bay Area. She's on the West Coast. It's a bit earlier, but hopefully at a reasonable hour for you. And Kyoko has been a past recipient of the Japan-US Friendship Commission's funding because what she's done is to be able to found and create a network of performing artists. She is the founder and executive director of US-Japan Cultural Trade Network. And Kyoko, welcome. We're looking forward to hearing about your deep experience in the United States and also the work that you've done to bring performing artists to Japan and also from Japan to the United States. And finally, we have from Georgia, Mr. Jim Reed. And Jim is the president and CEO of YKK Corporation of America. He's been with the company for a number of years and will be telling us about their corporate mission and goal to support the communities in which they do business. And he has had his own cross-cultural experience with Japan that I wonder if it has influenced in any way the fantastic work that he and YKK are doing in Georgia and in Toyama Prefecture. So welcome, Jim, and we look forward to hearing more about your work. So as you can see, we have a variety of panelists. We also have our next generation represented. And what I wanted to talk about first is just the value of cultural exchange more broadly, and particularly of building a pipeline. We often hear when we talk about the US-Japan relationship, its strength and its longevity. And that is in large part because of the people that are behind the issues that we're addressing and the communities in which we serve. And as the Secretary General of COLCON, my day-to-day work and responsibility is looking for opportunities to promote that strong and important cross-cultural people-to-people exchange. But I know that it's not always easy, and it's certainly not easy when we're finding ourselves limited to these virtual platforms. And so I'd like to first hear from our panelists about their own experience. What did it mean for them when they first went to Japan or came to the United States? What was that like for them? And what did they take away from that experience that they've been able to apply in the work that they're doing today? So if I may, I'll start with Jim and ask if you can let us know about your personal experience with Japan and the impact it had on you.
Thank you, Paige. It's great to be here. It is impossible for me to overstate the impact my first experience with Japan was, how impactful that was on me. I was an exchange student in college and had never been out of the country before. And being a kid from Kentucky, you had an expectation that people did things a certain way and went about their lives in a certain way. And when I went to Japan, I was able to see that people come at issues from a completely different perspective, but still seem to get it right. And of course, fell in love with the culture, the food, and the people. And that has really set me on the path where I have been going for the last 34 years.
Wow. Thank you for that. And may I ask, where did you study?
Kansai Gaidai University in Hirakata.
Of course.
And I'm embarrassed to say that while every weekend I would go and hitchhike somewhere, my homestay parents, being good Osaka people, kept telling me, don't go to Tokyo. Don't go to Tokyo. It's terrible. It's terrible there. You go someplace else. So for a year and a few months, I went everywhere but Tokyo. I didn't go to Tokyo till I was an adult. And then I get to Tokyo. I'm like, this place is great. Those people were telling me lies this whole time. They said all they care about is shoes. They don't care about food. They don't understand.
Well, I have to say, during my jet years, I was in Mie Prefecture. And so going to Osaka was going to the big city, and I know the wonderful food that's there. So takoyaki is one of my favorites, and I suspect your host family made sure that you had that on a regular basis.
I learned to make it. Yes, of course.
Great for you. I'm impressed. So Kyoko, may I ask you to let us know your first time in the United States? When and what was that like?
Yes, well, thank you. So I'm originally from Kyoto, but when I was 6, my family moved to Madison, Wisconsin because of my father's medical research at UW. Mm. And I wasn't making friends, couldn't speak English, having pretty miserable time. But one day, and this is going to be a little bit a cliche maybe, but the teacher invited my mother to join me to introduce Japanese culture. So I wore my kimono and showed off my fan, and my mom taught classmates how to make origami and use chopsticks, and also for some reason chopstick rest, hashioki. And then that little event made a big difference for me. And looking all the way back to that when I was 6, that was my first Nichibei Bunka Koryu experience. Then, yeah. Well, I went back to Japan. My family went back to Japan, and of course, I had less problem fitting back in. I engaged in performing arts, dance, and theater in elementary school and all through college. And then I found myself landing doing performing arts, international performing arts programs at Spiral in Tokyo. Then I was frustrated because of the gender inequity, not even glass ceiling, but solid walls all around for professional women in Japan. And I wanted to maybe get a degree, get trained in the United States. And then that will advance my career. I went to New York City to attend Brooklyn College CUNY, and that was 1991. And I stayed ever since. Well, of course, I do go back to Japan for business, but I've been based in the U.S. Ever since.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. That's a deep experience, and I'm so glad to know that you had that positive experience as a young person eventually, and then it made you feel motivated to study abroad in the United States. One of the things, this actually is International Education Week, and there are recent surveys put out by IIE that are showing the trends of student mobility between Japan and the United States. And many of us have been working for many years trying to increase the number of American students going to Japan, and people like Cameron have been doing that on a steady basis, but we're seeing a decline in Japanese students going from Japan to the United States. And so you had a 4-year experience, did you not, in New York? Were you living in the dorm among other students? Is your degree from CUNY?
It was 2 years and a very practical program. So I kind of went right into like internship and working in the field. Yeah, but yeah, the continued education after that, I owe it to all my colleagues in the field of nonprofit. I had such a fascination about the mission-driven business model working in Japan during the bubble economy era. So, yeah, thank you.
Well, that's great. Thank you for sharing about your early experience. And how about you, Cameron? Can you tell us, I know that you started studying Japanese independently, but then you studied formally. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So when I was 13, I kind of stumbled across some Japanese music and it kind of blew my mind. I'm from Memphis, Tennessee, so there wasn't really much of a specifically Japanese community happening there. So I'd never really experienced anything like that before, and kind of got hooked, went to the library, got the basic hiragana book, learned the characters, struggled through the characters, I should say, rather, and eventually ended up going to the one high school in my state that taught Japanese, did that. My mom ended up finding a camp called Mori no Ike, for those who might be familiar with the Concordia language villages. So I was a 4-week student there every summer in their immersion program. Eventually became a counselor, a youth counselor there as well. And then went to Middlebury in Vermont, Middlebury College, which some people may know as being famed for their language programs, still just being addicted to wanting to figure out how to master the language. And then in college, I ended up finding dance. And so now professionally, I combine the two together through my company that's based here in New York.
That's fantastic. So, you know, I've always been impressed with Morino Ike, just because they really transported Japan into a rural community, you know, in the Midwest. But I'm wondering, when was your first experience actually getting on an airplane and going to Japan?
Right. So I actually didn't get to go until I went to college. So
Okay.
by the time I went, I had been studying the language for like 8 or 9 years, maybe. So when I went, it kind of ended up feeling almost like a second home, I think the first time, because I just spent so much of my time and energy investing in this place that was so far away, that by the time I got there, things didn't feel quite as foreign or quite as out of place. And so, yeah, the first time I went was in college because I got the college to pay for it. And then been very fortunate since then to be a grantee from the Asian Cultural Council. So I was there for 3 months studying the intersection of Buto and street dance. And then I was very fortunate also to now be one of the Creative Artist Fellows for the United States Japan Friendship Commission. So I've been able to be there earlier this year, actually, if you can imagine how long ago that was. In February at the ambassador's residence, and hopefully soon again collaborating with Toru Shimazaki, who's my creative partner for the fellowship.
Great. Well, thank you for that background. And now we'll hear from Patsy. Patsy, you're originally from Houston, or from Fort Worth, Texas, or from Texas?
I'm from Texas, yes.
From Texas, okay. And so how did you get yourself from Texas to Japan?
I'm from small town Texas, to be precise, Odessa. As Cameron mentioned, his hometown had very little to offer in the way of Japanese experiences, and mine did as well. However, in my junior year of high school, the independent school district in our area had decided that they were going to take on a new pilot satellite language learning program. So I was tapped to be a part of this initial program and was assigned the Japanese language to learn by way of satellite. So we had these bi-weekly TV satellite broadcasts that we would tune into to learn Japanese from a Japanese language instructor who was on the East Coast. Well, needless to say, the success of that program was questionable, and I learned very little Japanese. However, it did pique my interest in Japan and led to me pursuing various opportunities in university that would allow me to really gain firsthand experience with Japan. So as a sophomore in undergrad here in Texas, I joined a sister city study abroad program that connected the cities of Fort Worth and Nagaoka City, which is in Niigata Prefecture. And I did a summer homestay program that allowed me to get a feel for Japanese culture and connect with a Japanese community really on a people-to-people basis. That particular event would transform my life. So when I returned to university in my junior year, I decided to swap my internship that I had on Capitol Hill to pursue an internship with the United States Information Agency, and had the opportunity to really work with exchange at on the government level, in the sense that we were communicating with embassies across the globe, particularly the US Embassy in Tokyo, making possible various people-to-people exchanges, as well as various arts and cultural activities. So I got to see US-Japan exchange from the government perspective at that period of time. During that time, I was also introduced to the Japanese exchange teaching program, which we affectionately refer to as JET. Paige is also an alum. And on the JET program, I spent 3 years there. In Nagaoka, not in Nagaoka, I spent my time on JET program in Iwate Prefecture, which is in northern Japan. Afraid to have spent 3 years on the JET program and return to the US and not be able to say that I had mastered Japanese, Instead of returning to the States, I moved to Tokyo, entered Sophia University, and pursued intensive Japanese language studies there. Connections at Sophia led to a job at a Japanese law firm, Nagashima Ono Tsunematsu, where I would help promote exchange between law students in the US and having them come to Japan and spend their L1 summers with our firm, and also promoting exchange of young Japanese lawyers with firms in the US. In addition to that, I spent some time at Keio University after sitting the Japanese entrance exam and pursued studies in arts management. My opportunities there and the curriculum there allowed me to spend some time shadowing the then director of the Mori Art Museum, and I had the chance to travel with him to Singapore as he was curating the second Singapore Biennale. So it was a wonderful opportunity to experience Japan and exchange with Japan on a variety of levels, both in the private sector, the public sector, and the voluntary sector. And all of those experiences have led me to where I am today, promoting grassroots exchange, again, here in Texas.
Well, that's fascinating. And it's just fascinating about the journey, but also the varieties of ways that there are these US-Japan connections. I mean, on the educational level, for sure. But also I was struck by the exchange of law students, because sometimes we think about educational exchange, we think about artistic exchange, but we don't always necessarily think about the different disciplines where there might be some wonderful opportunity to share information, best practices, et cetera. And so I want to hear a little bit more later about what you're doing there at Japan American Society of Houston, because you are perfectly positioned to be able to pursue sort of the business and the art and culture side of things. But I know from reading a little bit about YKK's work that you're also supporting different, maybe unusual exchanges, both at the community level, but also in different professions. So can you tell us a little bit about YKK's relationship with Japan and the partnership you have with the community and what that looks like? Jim?
Sure, absolutely. Well, YKK is a Japanese company. It was founded in 1934 by Tadao Yoshida, our founder. And so we operate in 72 countries around the world. And he has planted seeds all over the place. Our founder's philosophy for the company is what's really driven things forward. We call it the cycle of goodness, and it says no one prospers without rendering benefit to others. And he was actually influenced by Andrew Carnegie, which I think is really interesting because you see Andrew Carnegie coming from Scotland as an immigrant to the United States, and then developing his gospel of capitalism and his tilt on that. And then how somehow this young man in Japan got a hold of that book and then developed his own philosophy. And now it comes back in the United States and springs around the world as really a business philosophy. And the notion is that you can't succeed unless you are contributing to this communities and the society as a whole. So that was his belief. And YKK has been very successful in the zipper business. I don't know if y'all are aware of that. So obviously it's a good business method too. So it's not just a question of, oh yeah, we make money and on the side, we also do this. This is actually just part, it's inculcated into the whole business philosophy. So what we do is we try to help plant seeds, not really knowing where those things are going to grow. And so that is done, that has to be done very actively. I have a colleague and vice president of corporate communications and community engagement, Jessica Cork. And you have to have somebody like her who is driving that, on those programs. And the nice thing about having a Japanese company with a long-term perspective is that we can keep pushing these programs in these communities. We're very actively involved in a doctor's exchange between a hospital in our town in Macon, Georgia, where we have a large manufacturing presence, to the hospital in Toyama. And I think we've had over 100 like 106 physicians and nurses from Toyama come to Macon for over a month to study how they practice medicine there. And then I think around 52 doctors from Macon, Georgia, have had the chance to go to Toyama and learn and share their practices. So we're not experts, we're not doctors, and we don't really know what the results are going to be, but we know that those are the seeds that you really want to plant.
That's fantastic. And when you talk about these seeds and planting, it reminds me when Ambassador Kato, Ryozo Kato, who was the Japanese ambassador from Japan to the United States a few years ago, talks about gardening and planting seeds. And in this work of public diplomacy and people-to-people exchange, that's exactly what we're all doing. I mean, we are now the trees, the flowers of the seeds that others planted when they initially introduced us to the Japanese language or to English, or, you know, gave us that opportunity to have an experience, not knowing what direction it would take us in. So I am wondering, do you know whether the doctors continue any ties or connections, the Americans to Japan, or on their own have any returned or pursued any kind of professional work involving Japan or the United States?
No, we have. You know, they of course they maintain their connections, and then they have improved each other's practices and maintained their communications. There's some very deep relationships between the physicians. And we're also involved in the exchange programs with the high schools in our communities. So we have manufacturing usually in rural communities. And so while there's a sister city relationship between Kurobe, our hometown in Japan, and Macon, Georgia, government officials, they come and go with the administration, and sometimes there's a lot of energy and sometimes there's not a lot of energy. And I'm really proud of the work that Jessica especially has been doing over the years to keep that program going. So I just wanted to highlight that in case anybody in a corporation, that what can I do? Yeah. Keep those high school exchange programs going. We don't do that much. I mean, we pay for the plane ticket, but a lot of these kids have never been on a plane before. So you can really change people's lives there with a very small investment. We've had over 500 kids go to Japan over the last couple of decades just from Macon, and another several hundred from Dublin, Georgia, going to Osaka too.
That's fantastic. And then maybe after they've had that experience, they'll decide to take a Japanese class in college. And then one thing leads to another, and they're starting a dance troupe, or for example.
Exactly.
So Cameron, can you, since I mentioned the dance troupe, can you let us know what motivated you to create your own dance company? What is the motivation behind and the mission of Kizuna Dance?
Sure. So I started Kizuna for a lot of different reasons. To have a home for my own artistic voice, of course, but also to combine these two interests that have become the focal point of my entire life. So when I left college, I wasn't going to give up my Japanese practice or my interest in the Japanese culture, of course. And so I then brought them together with dance. And then now what I do with the company is every work that I create for the company is rooted in various aspects of the Japanese language or culture. So we've made works about the Art Deco movement in Japan, about Zen Buddhism. We've made works about untranslatable words. We use kanji characters to create movement pathways in the creative process. And it's just kind of a way of engaging my dancers directly with the things that I'm interested in, but also helping pique interest for both them and also audience members in the beauty and the interesting parts of the Japanese culture as well. We also do have a commissioning program that brings in emerging artists and has them also engage in a research-oriented creative process around aspects of the Japanese culture. So we're trying to facilitate this exchange between younger artists who are looking for things to create works around, looking for new things to experience, and giving them a chance and a doorway into a culture that is unfamiliar for a lot of them. We're also looking to do it from the opposite way as well, and bringing a Japanese choreographer into the company to set work as well. And without the COVID-19 situation, we would have been able to kind of kick that off in a bigger way through our fellowship with the creative artists, JFC, with Toru Shimazaki this year. But hopefully for next year, those will be on the docket too. But I think the goal, I'm sorry, yeah.
Go ahead.
I think
no, please, go ahead.
I mean, I named the company Kizuna, for those that may not know, is a Japanese word for the bonds between people. And I think the goal of it was to create an environment in which community-oriented practices create more powerful performances. So we're trying to directly build these connections between artist communities from both of our countries. And then we can influence each other and actually be rooted in each other's physicalized experience. And that both provides a more powerful experience on stage, but then also creates these connections that extend beyond the stage and actually extend to a professional career and then for years and years after that.
That sounds exciting. And I'm wondering, it sounds like you're teaching through dance as well. I mean, you're educating, but you're also teaching about Japan and Japanese culture through the artistic expression. And are your audiences, how do they receive it? I mean, is there an opportunity for engagement? Do you hear about what impact your work may have had?
Yeah, so a lot of my study, my thesis in college, but also the focus of my fellowship with the Asian Cultural Council was on researching Buto and street dance and trying to combine those together, both from a physical perspective, but also from a theoretical and process-oriented perspective as well. And I do a lot of talkbacks and kind of seminars about how we might, how both the United States and Japan, at least dance artists in both of those countries, might actually come together around this similar sense of revolution that started both of those styles, and how we're actually connected in a lot of different ways, both movement-wise, but also as people. So I think the immediate reaction that I get oftentimes is confusion over what Buto is, which could be a whole nother seminar. But I think even more so than that is people are open to the idea, or now open to the idea that there's so many more ways to connect beyond just the traditional traditional ideas of policy creation, of policy making. The traditional ways of making deals and making connections. That actually, if we look at things from a more physical perspective, coming from a dance perspective, we can actually find ourselves going a little bit deeper than just a handshake or just a warmly signed email. We can actually put ourselves quite physically, quite literally, in the shoes of another person's experience and of their culture. And that's something that resonates, I think, deeper for many people, sticks deeper and lasts longer in terms of holding their interests and also holding their respect, even if they don't professionally go after learning the Japanese culture.
Well, thank you. I think that's beautifully said. And I know that the arts are a critical part of exchange. You learn a lot about a country and a culture through its artists and artistic expression. And Kyoko, I know you're both a performer, but you've also yourself been an innovator. And I'm wondering, what was it that made you want to establish a network of American and Japanese performing artists? And how did that come into being? Can you tell us about the Cultural Trade Network?
Yes, sure. So hard to follow Cameron's beautiful story, but I wanted to create the systematic exchange, reciprocal, between the two countries, focusing on performing arts. And I really, from the beginning, I really cared about intercultural collaboration, dialogue, diversity, inclusion. And as a very small nonprofit entity ourselves, but helped by like Arts Midwest, which incubated the program. Before we became independent in 2007, we were during that incubation also funded by the Japan-US Friendship Commission. We partner with diverse communities in all over both countries. So in addition to regional arts organizations such as Arts Midwest, one of the prominent partnerships that we forged was with a National Performance Network, NPN. So NPN has about 70 to 80 partner members, and they're literally based in all over the United States, consisting of performing arts presenters and visual artists. And then we partnered with Japanese network organizations such as, I'm not sure if Cameron knows, but JCDN, which is Japan Contemporary Dance Network. Actually, it was modeled after NPN, but the reason they created was there wasn't a system for contemporary dance to tour from Hokkaido to Okinawa. So we tied up with them. And then also later with ONPAM. ONPAM is Open Network for Performing Arts Management. And this was really formed largely in response to the 2011 tsunami nuclear plant disaster. Younger generation of cultural leaders felt the need to bond together and collectively move things progressively forward. So, and then they too have about, both JCDN and ONPAM have about 150 to 200 members, again, based all over the country. So with those like pipelines or the network ties, we thought that we are really, effective in regards to diversifying the coverage and sharing what the process and the outcome of our exchange efforts. Of course, you can't bring all those people. So we selected 3 to 4 members from NPN's membership first. And then we identified 3 to 4 counterparts in Japan. And over the course of 2 to 3 years, we would go back and forth to each country and attend in like convenings or also festivals, seeing artist shows, but really engage in deep dialogue, and not to know just about the artists, which artist is up and coming, but a lot about social context and social issues, burning issues as well. And then the organizers would think about what kind of structure then would be most effective to address the issues. And then we got together and thought, okay, then finally, which artist should we ask to do the actual exchange? So that process took, longer than perhaps usual when one presenter would select which artist to come to the States, but resulted in unique and deep exchange programs. And then it's reciprocal. So yeah, so sometimes we had, for example, a dance choreographer based in Austin, Alison Orr, to go to Japan, and she worked with a Japanese women professional baseball team based in Kyoto. And also a choreographer, the choreographer Nora Chipumar, originally from Zimbabwe, based in Brooklyn. She went to Kyoto, did a residency, and the organizer had such a great experience with her that they went ahead and invited her back. And then the next year, she was in 5 different islands in Okinawa doing ritual performance and community programs.
So may I just interrupt and say what I'm hearing you talk about when you talk about a network is that, as an individual, there's a lot that can be accomplished and you're sharing a wonderful story. But when you bring people together, you can sort of deepen the connection in the field and in the community, and so that there's this like ripple effect. So when people get introduced to somebody else that they can learn from or they have a connection with, then they might collaborate and do something else. And, you know, I hate to use the term, but we're in this COVID moment and we're talking about super spreaders. But I feel like, you know, what you're describing is a super spreader event among the performing artists, in that you're bringing, you know, a few together, and then it sort of ripples and grows and expands into a much larger community that has a deep connection to each other, which is what's so wonderful about reciprocal collaborative exchanges. If I may, because I know we have a few questions that are in the Q&A box, and I want to make sure that we learn a little bit more about the work of the Japan America Society, because the Japan America Societies are a network for sure, a really valuable and important network spreading across the United States. And I know each functions differently, particularly as it meets the needs of its local community. So Patsy, can you tell us about how the city of Houston is served by your society and how those ties have been deepened as a result of your work?
Of course. As you mentioned, Japan America Society of Houston is a part of a network of Japan America Societies across the United States. There are 38 members of the National Association of Japan America Societies, and we are proud to be one of 4 of those members here in the state of Texas. So Japan America Society of Houston, we like to say that we exemplify the spirit of our community, as it is diversity and inclusivity that really makes us strong. Houston is considered one of the most diverse cities in the US, in the sense that there is no one ethnic majority, and nearly 1 in every 4 residents of Houston are actually foreign born. In fact, Houston today mirrors what most demographers forecast the US population will really look like in 4 decades. So we are truly aiming to create a nurturing environment for people from a variety of backgrounds. Efforts of the Japan America Society of Houston really are to promote mutual understanding through the sharing of Japan's distinctive heritage and culture. We do that in various ways, whether it be through a Japan festival that we host in the city's largest park every year for 2 days. We do that through youth ambassador exchanges. We are Houston's point of contact for the Houston-Chiba sister city relationship. We do that through programs in the schools. We go into the schools and share different aspects of Japanese culture, whether it be origami or calligraphy writing, shodo. We have the opportunity to work with educators and create curriculum around Japan. One new initiative that was actually made possible through the Japan Society in New York, our friends there, is a new program that helps us help teachers, in the sense that we're now able to provide teacher and educator development programs that help them gain the resources they need to teach their students about Japan and Japanese history. So we're proud to be able to also support not only students, but teachers as they work to share information about Japan. So our activities for the community have provided cultural enrichment for the Houston area and schools, various community groups. It's also really provided our Japanese businesses with opportunities to connect as well. Texas has seen an influx of Japanese investment, particularly over the past 5 years. Japan has actually recently overtaken the UK to become the largest investor in our state. And with more than 400 Japanese companies in Texas now, making up the largest group of foreign-owned enterprises and employing over 60,000 workers, Japan has become very important to the economic fabric of our state. So our goal with the Japan America Society of Houston, as we often like to say, is to raise the profile of Japan in our area, to show our community that Japan has a huge impact on our state, on our economy. And so we're hoping to develop relationships and highlight the relationships that are developing on the economic front. and making that possible for our general community to understand and to access.
That's great. And, you know, we named this, and thanks to Jim with his sort of business mindset, you know, we wanted to have an engaging title. And so rather than just simply cultural and educational exchange, it's a winning investment. And I think that's the critical piece here. And it sounds like your corporate donors are investing certainly in Houston and US-Japan exchange. And I am wondering, are you seeing any concerns about continued funding and support because of COVID? I know it's had an economic impact on our economy. And so I'm wondering, in Houston, Patsy, do you have any concerns about the future sustainability of the programs that you're offering? And then Jim, I'll turn to you next and just ask whether or not does this COVID moment change or potentially change any of the work that you will be doing going forward? But Patsy, what's your experience been like for the society?
Yeah, resource capacity has always been a challenge for a small nonprofit. But one of the silver linings, I think, of the pandemic and the COVID-19 crisis is that we've had the opportunity to somewhat slow down and really reevaluate our goals. So just as the crisis has caused so many of us to really refocus on the things that matter most to us personally, the Japan America Society has taken this time to really bring that same focus to our organization. So we have recently engaged a consultant to reground ourselves in why we do what we do and what differentiates us from other organizations in our area. And we are using that sort of as our North Star, so to speak, to help us determine what we need to support our work, our mission, our vision, to continue to grow and to continue to provide value for our corporate members. And so we are really working at essentially exploring both financially and in terms of organizational capacity, how we can achieve sustainability. So that has been a major area of activity for the Japan America Society of Houston during this crisis. We all know that I'm sure my fellow Japan America Society friends across the network would share that we would not be able to do the work that we do without the support of corporations like YKK. And I cannot express gratitude enough for those corporations who invest in so much in what we do to carry out our mission of connecting the US and Japan on a people-to-people level. So thanks go to Jim and to YKK and all of our like corporate friends out there.
Thank you for that. It is an important time to do some strategic thinking, and some of the best practices that we're learning from this moment may go forward. I mean, how wonderful that we're able to, in a cost-effective way, have this kind of a gathering. We don't have to pay for all of you to fly to Washington, DC to gather in person. We can offer this quality experience. And so I suspect that there'll be some other innovations and best practices going forward that will stay with us. But Jim, I'm wondering, are you as a company feeling any pressure to continue the level of philanthropy? And do you anticipate needing to make any adjustments for the type of programming that you've been offering up until this point?
Well, several years ago, we analyzed our giving and made sure it was in line with some of the core things we wanted to accomplish. This was pre-COVID. So focusing on environment, specifically trees, that's a long story, but student exchange and Japan culture. So those are kind of the three things we decided that we're going to do best, right? Mm-hmm. We may not be donating to the Georgia Manufacturers Association anymore, or this softball team, but we are going to focus on exchange programs. So when COVID hit, that was often a question. Of course, we've been significantly impacted from a business perspective, but so are nonprofits. From my thinking is those are nonprofits. So these are investments that we're making. These are the seeds that we're planting for the future. You don't cut on those type of investments, especially when they're needed the most. So we haven't made any significant changes in this year, knowing that because that'll help those companies, or help those organizations going forward. Of course, we can't send kids to Japan, and that's a shame. For instance, we have this thing in Atlanta called the Japan Fest, and it's just a big weekend and or week-long set of programs, and it's just wonderful, and it's tens of thousands of people, and we had to do it virtually, but it was still fun, and it was still interesting, and we still participated, and we still sponsored, and you know, we're finding out new ways to do things. But as you know, if I can communicate out to any corporate leaders, this is not an also because you have an obligation. This is an investment in the company's future, because you're making deposits in the goodwill of the community, and you're going to be making withdrawals in the future. So don't worry about that. Just go ahead and make those deposits now. And I just love what Patsy's doing, because, you know, Japanese companies tend to be quiet about what they do in communities. You know, you have a lot of managers that are expats coming from Japan, and they got their head down, and they're like in the 4 walls or 6 walls of their factory or office, and that's what they're focused on for the time they're there. And so it is necessary to have organizations help the Japanese companies tell their story about how they really do participate, because the Japan-US connection, militarily, politically, culturally, educationally, business-wise, is the most important relationship we have in the world.
Thank you. Thank you for that endorsement, because it is important and critical that the private sector make the investment. The Japan-US Friendship Commission is an independent federal grant-making agency. We are one of few that support the US-Japan community, and there's just a great deal of need. And so the private sector's investment matters a great deal. And I know that in terms of operationally, there have been some disruptions, and I know Cameron alluded to it. Kyoko, when we spoke, you talked about a digital residency that you're thinking about as an option. Is that something that you can share with us, what that might look like in response to COVID?
Yes, sure. It's still at the planning phase, but we are planning to launch it next spring. And of course, like everybody's saying, nothing can beat the in-person face-to-face exchange. But this is to augment or to continue the dialogue, because just because we can't physically go back and forth or gather, we can't stop the dialogue and the connection. So we are designing this now, but we want artists to be part of the designer. And the outline we envision is that we will have a 1 month quote unquote residency time. Of course, American artists to be hosted by a Japanese presenter, and vice versa. And really to learn about the context of each other's community, and then engage in the learning and addressing the social issues, and hoping that we will, through those dialogues, and this means that myself and Associate Director Miwa Kaneko will do a kind of like a marathon interpretation, but that's what we've been doing in a way, bilingual and kind of bicultural facilitation, between and among artists and presenters in the community. That's what we do. So, utilizing Zoom and digital technology, we want to, promote and continue that dialogue and the process. The outcome, by the time of the outcome, maybe several months later or a year or two later, we will raise additional fund and believe that time, like Phil was saying at the beginning, that we don't have to mute ourselves to interact.
And Kyoko, may I ask a question? Are the artists who you work with, Americans and Japanese, fluent in the other language? One of the questions is, how do you work together when one person doesn't speak Japanese or the other doesn't speak English? So do you have a prerequisite that there's language facility or proficiency, or do you have work with people like you who are bilingual?
Oh, well, thank you. We didn't want the language skills to be the barrier for the exchange opportunity. I feel like that's why CTN is here for. We will do the interpretation because, you know, even you know, people who speak both languages, you think one way in one and perhaps other in the other. So, you know, I think it's very important that, for example, Japanese artists to be able to think and communicate in their first language. And I also, you know, like I think Haruki Murakami would often say, Japanese right from right to left, top to down, English left to right, horizontally. So this, you know, we have this, that itself is almost like a threads that weave tapestry, and that's like make things more full and organic and interesting. So we want that like Japanese thinking in Japanese language to be intact, but we will do, you know, contextual translation so that sometimes it may be not like the smooth English, but it will be a kind of a genuine reflection of the culture and thought. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm wondering, Cameron, in your work, are your company members bilingual like you? And does that matter? Does it enrich the experience or make it more challenging? And I also want you to talk a little bit more about the COVID disruption that you're experiencing, because, you know, there is this question about how are we persevering, particularly for somebody who's, you know, in a field where, you know, it requires being close to other people, you know, usually indoor space, and for your work, getting on an airplane. So maybe you can tell us about your company, but you can also tell us about your collaboration with Yamazaki Sensei, because how is that going to go with the language issue and also with the social distancing challenge?
Yeah, there's a lot of challenges in there, but you know, limitation provides for creativity. So you know, we're looking forward to taking those challenges on. I'll say from my company's perspective, you know, like I mentioned before, I've studied the language for 15 years now, so I have a fair amount of comfort with it. But none of my company speaks any Japanese in any way, shape, or form. And while that might initially be considered a challenge, I actually, in terms of the immediacy of collaboration, it's actually conducive to what our craft is geared toward. Because in fact, it makes everything more physical, right? It makes everything come back to the body when the words can't provide that information for you. And so in actuality, it offers a more authentic and raw version of expression and of intentionality. When the meaning can't really be disguised or clouded over by words that might be mistranslated or anything like that. So from a dance perspective, it's actually fine. You know, we can really quite literally speak just with the physical shapes and forms and still find ways to collaborate and to expand each other's artistic visions. I'll say for my collaboration with Toru Shimazaki, who's my creative partner for the United States-Japan Definitive Commission, it's been very challenging. Originally, the goal was for me to be in Kobe for a month and working with his company directly on the creation of this work, and then to translate it back to my company in New York, with the end goal being that the 10 dancers perform together in Japan. So obviously 10 dancers on stage right now is not really gonna work. Neither is flying to Japan. But if I might speak to the power of just being in person with people in terms of facilitating cultural exchange, I'll say that in this time when a lot of collaborative missions that might have been talked about before times, before COVID, might have fallen off, I'll say those that we were able to meet in person and really exchange face-to-face have been the ones that are lasting. And so through my ability to meet up with Shimazaki-san through the ACC fellowship last year, but also to collaborate with him and one of his dancers, Sayo Homa, when I was performing at the ambassador's residence in Tokyo earlier this year, that kind of experience of being in the room with someone and being able to feel their energy in that space, to hear their voice and how it connects to the ideas that they represent is invaluable. I might also add that I think the bond of karaoke is forever. So, so anyone, so as soon as you come out of the karaoke room, that's a lifelong friendship. That's a lifelong collaboration, even if it just starts with getting the song right. So I've been very grateful for those experiences in person to collaborate with him, because even though the physicalization of our collaboration isn't able to come to fruition at the moment, what instead has replaced it is an expression, a more overt expression and a more eager expression of ideas and concepts. And I think that that exploration of where can we go in the midst of these limitations, what do you actually want to portray? What is important to us in terms of connecting our dancers, connecting our cultures? So much of that comes to the forefront when normally it might come behind the physicalization of it. And I think that's been kind of a rare chance to check it back into refocusing your goals for collaboration.
That's fantastic. And you really hit the nail on the head when it really has to do with personal relationships and face-to-face interactions. I mean, one of the things I'm missing most about, this opportunity to go to Japan is I like just to go down into the subway system for two reasons. A, because I can see what the energy is and what the culture is, what the trends are, but also just to go down there and see the different shops and the foods. We were talking about Osaka earlier, Jim, and when I have to go to the Kansai area, I actually like to stay at a hotel in the Osaka train station, because then all I have to do is go downstairs and there's all this like great food, and I don't even have to go very far for a really good meal. And it's just the cuisine, it's the energy, it's the movement, and I can't wait for the day that we all get to be back at that, because that is sort of what it's all about. I know we're running out of time. There are a couple of questions that need to be addressed. And one actually has to do with, it was really just asking about advocacy for funding. And so I'm going to ask the question maybe in another way, because I want to make sure that we're thinking about the next generation. You mentioned, Patsy, that you did part of your experience, I think it was JED in Iwate. And Iwate, we all know, was definitely impacted by the Tohoku disasters. And I think even Kyoko, you mentioned that some of the origins of CTN emanated from the March 11th disasters. I mean, I think that sometimes difficult situations like this COVID moment we're in can sort of springboard and result in some better opportunity. And so as we think about a next generation, because I feel like somebody's made the investment in our ability to be where we are now. And so if we were to finish the sentence, it's important to invest in the US-Japan relationship so that, how would you finish that phrase? What is the so that for you or the work that you're doing? So what I'm continuing to work at Japan America Society so that, or it's important to invest in the Japan America Society so that, or it's important to invest in Kizuna dance so that. How would you finish that? And what's YKK so that? Why, Jim, are you continuing to lead this effort? So maybe I'll just sort of start with you, since I just mentioned your name, Jim.
Oh man, so that was just an easy question.
I haven't been known for those.
Why do we exist? Well, I think for YKK, it is because we have children. You're just going to do this so that the next generation can enjoy. I took my family to Japan last September for their first time. So that was, so enriching for them to have that experience for the first time, because it's such a beautiful place to go and the culture is so fantastic. All you want to do is to share that, and continuing to strengthen that. Again, I'm going to focus on Japan and US. I think such a special friendship. And there's so many dynamics going on around the world, so many competing interests, that we just really have a very strong interest in continuing to do that. US is influencing Japan. Japan is influencing the US. For instance, YKK's commitment to climate change, from a very business perspective, saying, yes, it exists. And yes, we're going to do these things over the next 30 years. And of course, we're going to do that, because that's our responsibility as a corporation. There's corporations in the United States that need to learn that lesson. And there's children in the United States that are going to change the way they live because they've had that experience in Japan. And there's Japanese kids who are going to change the way they live. And that's going to keep that bridge going. And we're going to keep making wise and smart choices for the next generation after that.
Thank you. Well said. I'm persuaded. And I hope our friends at US Japan Council are taking notes, because they want to be our advocates. So Kyoko, why should companies, why should government institutions invest in creative arts and performing arts networks? So that
so in diverse communities in both countries will increase their appreciation and respect for all beings through intercultural dialogues, collaboration, and engagement in creative activities. And we believe there is a transformative power achieved when multiple perspectives are brought in, multiple lenses that stimulates deep awareness and appreciation, ultimately for oneself and one's home, which leads to happiness. Sorry, I
love that. I think when the key word there is respect. It's that mutual respect, because sometimes, we read about other people or we've heard about other countries and we create these notions for ourselves. But when we've actually met people and had that personal relationship and meet people from some place that's maybe different from our own, then you come to respect them as individuals, as human beings, and the countries that they come from. So thank you for those words. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
Patsy, I'm sorry. Were you going to say one more thing?
Oh, no. This was part of our draft vision and value through our strategic planning. So yeah, thank you.
I think you've nailed it. Good.
Thank you.
And Patsy, how would you finish that thought in terms of investing in the US-Japan people-to-people community ties, so that...
I echo Kyoko's statement about diversity. Diversity is our reality. So in a world really where we are ever more connected through increasing globalization of communications, whether it be trade or labor practices, there's a need for cultural competency. And it's become ever more critical. So when we talk to our corporate sponsors or prospective supporters of our organization, that's one thing that we always share that we can bring to the table. We bring an ability to help support the corporation's cultural competency efforts, whether it be by teaching Japanese to staff members of an American company, or vice versa. Some of our Japanese corporations want their local employees, their American staff members, to learn more about Japanese culture. So really, it's those soft and firm skills that are really gained that sort of support adaptability and decision-making and problem solving and resilience and self-reflection that really can be achieved by putting yourself in someone else's shoes and really exploring another person's culture, whether it be through language or cultural activities such as dance or music. So really, Japan America Society of Houston is truly grateful to be able to continue fostering these people-to-people connections and helping forge a resilient alliance between the US and Japan.
That's great. Thank you so much for that. And Cameron, you're both an individual and you're also representing an organization and an institution. And so when the Japan-US Friendship Commission makes an investment in you as the artist, we're doing that so that what?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a lot of thoughts on this, and I'll just echo what everyone else has said, but I'll also add, as I think a general reminder, dance and the arts are political. You know, they're social and political, and I think that's often overlooked when it comes to the arts, but especially for dance specifically. And I think if I were to just focus on dance for a second, I think dance has a very unique power of being both the idealization, or having the opportunity to represent both the idealization and also the raw version of what it means to be a part of any culture or a part of any group, but also as just a citizen of the world. And, you know, dance is always contemporary, I think, in the sense that it's always a response to our time. So as we're looking for innovative ways of problem solving, innovative ways of connecting and bridging cultures, innovative ways of existing and continuing to exist, and open our minds to new ways of doing that. I think we can look to dance and the arts specifically for those innovations in how we connect, and those innovations in how we build a world that's just better, build a better world for people that are coming after us. I think the investment in yourself, if I could just say personally, just in learning a different language and being able to put yourself, you know, mentally and physically in someone else's place and time, I think opens so much of your mind and life to different parts that you hadn't realized before, and offers you just really makes the world a more beautiful place, I think, both for you and for those around you as well. So I think from a personal level and also from an institutional level, you know, the investment in the investment of private organizations, of investment in yourself in terms of learning a language and engaging in this kind of bilateral relations is something that is necessary for moving the world forward. And, you know, it starts with you. So here we are.
Thank you so much. You've got the last word on that. I'm just going to simply say that you all are fantastic. I mean, I love the myriad ways that you've all sort of entered this US-Japan dialogue, you know, from a personal interest with professional skills that may not even have seemed like they would have matched up, but you've been able to find a way to lead the way and make a way for others. And so thank you so much for the many ways that you're contributing to the US-Japan relationships. I think our communities are stronger, our people are more connected, and I'm certainly inspired by the work that you're doing and the fact that I am part of this community. So thank you all so much, Jim Reed, Cameron McKinney, Patsy Yoon Brown, and Kyoko Yoshida. Your investment in this important relationship is not going unnoticed. All of us on this webinar and all of us in the community, thank you for the work that you're doing. And before I let everybody go, I just want to also say that the US-Japan Council has another session that's coming up this evening at 6 p.m. It's baseball diplomacy, and Yuriko Gamer-Romer is going to be sharing a bit of her film, but there's a wonderful, and there they all are, group of panelists who are going to be talking about the wonderful exchanges actually, and the personal stories that happen both with respect to American and Japanese culture through the legends of baseball management business, and they'll share their observations, their stories and anecdotes about the sport that's very important to both the United States and Japan. So I hope you'll come back, stay tuned for more, and congratulations to the US-Japan Council, my friends there. You've done a fantastic job, and thank you so much to all of our panelists. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
See you.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.